Hello, this is Jim Mustich at Iona University. I'm here today in conversation with John Warner, who is our first presidential speaker for the 25-26 academic year and who will deliver the keynote address for the first conference of our Gabelli Center for Teaching and Learning, The Future of Teaching, Writing, Reading, and Thinking in the Age of AI. John Warner, welcome.
Very glad to be here.
John, you are now, at this point in your career, an accomplished writer, editor, and teacher of writing. You've published 3 acclaimed books: The Writer's Practice, Why They Can't Write, Killing the 5-Paragraph Essay and Other Necessities, and most recently, More Than Words, How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI, which has received superb reviews and generated much conversation. I want to start at the beginning, though. I know that you've told me and you've written about the fact that while you were growing up, your mom owned a bookstore. So what influence did that exert on your later career?
Well, you don't know until later, right? Like when you're growing up, it's just, this is normal. It's not like I thought every kid's mom had a bookstore, but I took it for granted that after school, I could walk, it was about 3/4 of a mile from my grade school to her store, the book bin. And I used to just go after school and sit in the store and pick a book off the shelf and read. In fact, after the store expanded after a few years, they built a sort of like reading nook in the kids section. That was, I just considered it mine. Mm-hmm. And it was just a lot of freedom. It was entirely normal. The influences, it wasn't just the store. It was both my parents were readers. Our house was filled with books. I was constantly picking books off the shelf and reading them, some of which I probably shouldn't have. You know, I was reading like Tom Wolfe when I was 13, and I think I read Clan of the Cave Bear when I was about 14. I mean, these are things that are not for kids. But it was just the air I breathed. Books are something we spend time with. Books are a great way to occupy our time. If we went on a road trip, I had a backseat filled with books. I did other things too, but it was just an entirely natural part of my life.
But your path to becoming a writer wasn't direct, in that you didn't decide, from what I understand, in early age you're going to be a writer and follow a prescribed path to that. You kind of awakened as a writer a little slowly?
Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, very conventional upbringing. I used to tell my students, if you want to know what my youth was like, watch the films of John Hughes, which were filmed in and around my high school about when I was that age. Uh-huh. Like Ferris Bueller's Day Off was filmed at my high school when I was in high school. So very conventional. People are doctors and lawyers and this kind of stuff. And my dad was a lawyer, and I loved reading, and I was interested in writing. Writing was something I was good at in school, but being a writer just sounded strange, right? Like that's like saying I'm going to go be a professional baseball player or something like that. So while I was interested in it, I majored in it as a creative writing in college. It still was just, this is something that I can stand to do, but I didn't really consider it necessarily as like, this is going to be my goal. I never had a goal as a young person to like write a novel or be a writer or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. In the course of your teaching and writing, you developed what you call a writer's practice. You have a book called The Writer's Practice. Can you talk about what exactly you mean by that? I mean, I know that it's not just the skills in your sense. It's kind of the state of mind, your approach, habits of mind, I think you say. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the writer's practice I define as the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and habits of mind of writers. And really, you can think about a practice in the context of any kind of job, right? Doctors literally have a practice. The comparison I make often and make explicitly in the book is a chef has a practice, the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and habits of mind of a chef. And really, these things are not discrete, they intersect. How you practice your skills has a lot to do with your attitudes and your habits of mind, right? But I use that framework as a way of understanding how the experiences of writing accrue to help you develop as a writer, where sometimes we're doing something where this is explicitly helping a particular skill, maybe let's say description. But also what's happening is a sort of development of a habit of mind, which is maybe paying attention, right? If we're going to describe something, we have to look closely and we have to think deeply about it. And I hit on this true confession. It took me many years of teaching before I even conceived of this as a framework for what I wanted students to experience. But once it sort of clicked, once the light bulb went off above my head, I started to see practices everywhere. And that maybe our goal is to develop our practices, whatever our practices may be.
The idea of a practice, and we can talk specifically about writing, but more generally as you're applying it now, is of particular interest to me because I have been engaged here at Iona in a lot of thinking with the faculty about artificial intelligence and what its effect on student learning will be, what its influence on teaching may be, and how it will influence the development of a mind. Most of the skills as we teach them in school are not from that practice view. They are do this. I mean, it's instructive. I know you wrote the writer's practice in tandem as you were writing the book about killing the 5-paragraph essay, and there's a kind of conversation between those two books. So I'm interested in, those books are both written well before the advent of AI, but they seem to be extremely relevant, as I see it, to what an education should be seeking to do as we try to teach students how to learn how to learn.
Yeah, at the root, it's pretty straightforward. We learn through experience.
Mm-hmm.
In practice, it gets very, very complicated and variable because we're individuals. And shaping those things really depends on who we are as individuals. And so what I saw in the kinds of work my students were doing prior to college, and even what I was having them do for many years when I was teaching, was actually divorced from the experiences that I think help people learn to develop as writers, which is a kind of productive struggle around a specific writing occasion with a specific audience, a specific need, a rhetorical situation. Most of what my students were doing was really confined to a fairly narrow band of like a school assignment. You're writing this for a teacher. The criteria are in this grading rubric, and this is how we're going to judge this. That's not how writing works in the world. Writing is meant to be read by an audience. It's communicative. And I just knew there was a way to marry the kinds of experiences we think are important for students to have in academic contexts, right? Summarizing an argument, making arguments of your own, integrating research, these sorts of things, with real audiences, real rhetorical situations, contexts that were relevant to students that would get them past that hurdle that I think many writing teachers these days are familiar with, which is a sort of not necessarily dislike or hate of writing, but an indifference to it, an inability to see why this might be something that's worth the student's time. I was going to fundamentally signal to students, I am curious about what you have to say about the world in the context of these things I'm going to ask you to do. Sometimes it would take a little convincing because school, what they'd experienced in school had not valued that before, but once it's sort of over the hump, once you kind of demonstrate, I do care, all of a sudden students will have a kind of different conception of what it means to write.
In your new book, you really are writing in the context of AI and the threat it either does or does not pose to writing and to reading. And in the book, you talk about that, you articulate how writing is thinking and writing is feeling and writing is an experience. and you develop these thoughts reflected off of the AI conversation, almost as if you're creating the intellectual arguments that support the practice that you've already developed. It's like you had the practice. AI forced you to kind of articulate it in a different way. Is that fair to say?
Very fair, very fair. The appearance of ChatGPT in November of 2022, the implications of that were clear to me from the moment I used it. Because I, for years, had been saying, like and why they can't write, killing the 5-paragraph essay and other necessities, that we had been tasking students with creating what I called writing-related simulations.
Mm-hmm.
You do things that look like writing but are not writing for the purposes of assessment criteria that is largely divorced from anything meaningful. And here's ChatGPT capable of cranking those things out in a matter of seconds in a way that would pass muster on the criteria we attach to those things, right? You remember the articles like in The Atlantic, the high school essay is dead, so is the college essay. It's high school English is dead, the college essay, all that stuff. And my response was like, yes, please, about time. Because I had been arguing, for years, even before those books came out, that this is a waste of time. Using our writing courses to do these kind of performances, these simulations, is not of any help to students. And maybe, I don't think I'm a naive person. I thought that if people like me and others who recognized what I believe to be these fundamental truths made these arguments out of the gate, and the first piece I wrote on ChatGPT was like a week after this thing appeared, I thought we're going to get some real momentum around shifting how we see this stuff. Certainly there's been some good conversations, but I've been chagrined to see the, I was about to say the deep enthusiasm, but there's no enthusiasm behind it. It's more just sort of conviction to try to cling to these old familiar forms simply because they're old and familiar, I think. I mean, I can't say for sure what motivates people, but I thought it should be a spur to everybody to start examining these things the way I had been, because I had been so immersed in teaching writing. Right. I was privy to inside information others weren't because they hadn't been doing it. We're now all paying attention. Okay, we're paying attention. These things seem self-evident. Let's move on. Not so much, apparently. These things are pretty persistent, it turns out.
Yes, but I think where you have been prescient is identifying the kind of deficiencies in that approach, independent of ChatGPT. When ChatGPT comes in, there's a kind of existential question of, I've heard speakers saying, well, do students really need to write at all? Do they really need to read? How would you answer that?
My answer is, of course. You and I know large language models don't write. They generate syntax. Writing is thinking, writing is feeling, writing is communicating, and often writing is thinking in a way where we realize what we think to ourselves. Yeah. It is the apprehension of knowledge that was maybe in here somewhere but was not apparent to ourselves. And there's really no substitute for that. Reading is the fuel for writing. The folks who say they're using this technology to summarize other texts for them, and then they're making use of those summaries in their texts, literally does not compute with me. I don't know. I've tried. I've experimented. I can't do it. Because what I'm doing when I write in conjunction with, or sometimes opposition to, other writers is I'm responding to what I call their unique intelligence. This is their idea. It comes from their very specific understanding of the world. I'm taking that in and seeking to understand it, and it's colliding with my unique intelligence, and something will come out of that, a literal spark, right? A little, like a reaction. A summary of somebody else's writing is not that. It's something else. The same way Cliff's Notes. Reading Cliff's Notes is not the same thing as reading the text itself.
Right.
It can give you enough, back in the day, it gave you enough information, maybe pass your freshman English teacher's exam on Romeo and Juliet, but you had not experienced Romeo and Juliet. And I see it as similarly, to the extent that we accept those substitutes, like the Cliff's Notes or an AI summary, I'm not saying that's never acceptable, but my question is always why? What are we doing that is acceptable? And if the thing we're doing is learning, I question its acceptability.
And the untethering of writing in producing outputs from AIs or from reading and reading the summaries, untethering of it from any experience of that kind of strips it of the ability to establish the kind of habits of mind and sensibility that you talk about in the writer's practice. I'll give you an example that's been much on my mind. As you know, I've been writing for a long time, decades. And recently, I took a bunch of journals that I've kept over the years, and I digitized them, both because I want to be able to search them, and because I didn't want my daughters to have to deal with the physical things and pretend to be in agony over throwing them out and when that time comes. But when you do that, you make PDFs, and in Adobe Acrobat, where you read the PDFs, there's a line now on everything of documents of a certain length, and it says, this appears to be a long document. And would you like to save time by reading a summary? And in that context, with these journals of my past life, I interpret that as you appear to be living a long life. Would you like to shorten it with a summary? And that's kind of stuck with me because it summarizes this detachment of making words or thoughts into a work product that are detached from the actual sense of time, sense of experience, any lived experience. And that's a kind of a way, if that is done at scale in a learning process, you would be giving students a kind of passing familiarity with everything, but it would be passing, and it would just be a familiarity. It wouldn't actually be a learning. So what is it about learning that is not represented in that equation?
Well, there's no experience, right? The experience has been erased. There's no reflection. There's no, to use a fancy teaching word, metacognitive process, right? Particularly in something like a diary. This is a record of your thoughts in specific moments at specific times over a course of time. And to make use of that later by summarizing it, it sort of does not compute, right? Like, why would you do that? I actually had an email from somebody, you reminded me of this story. I had an email from somebody, this is probably about 6 months ago, who was more like your kids in the equation. Their parent had these diaries, and they said, I'm thinking of digitizing these and then turning it into a book, a memoir of my mother's life. Because she said such an interesting life, but nobody knows about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to be kind, but my first reaction was like, why would you want to do that? What do you think that is, right? That's not even sort of the equivalent of like taking all your old photographs and making a slideshow. Like with the slideshow, at least you're looking at every picture.
Mm-hmm.
This is a non-thinking, non-feeling process that simply compresses that,
Mm-hmm.
those experiences. Now, it turns out this person was not, they weren't well versed on how a large language model works. And once I sort of talked about that, they were like, oh, yes, you're right. And I said, really, if you want to capture this something about your mom, either have her write her book or talk to her. Do an oral history of your mom from her, use her diaries as sort of source material, jumping off points, and let her talk. And I promise you, that's not a book anybody's going to publish probably, but you will have had an experience between you and your loved one that you will never forget. That notion that, this is particularly true in education, right? The idea that the product is all. If we create the product and we can assess the product and we can judge the product, therefore we've accomplished something, is just a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in a learning context, but even beyond that, the value, the worth is in the doing. And I don't like it. Sometimes I think I sound like some sort of crazy romantic dreamer when I talk about this, but we have to live lives, right? We have lives that we have to get up in the morning. We have to do something every day. What is the point if what we're doing is constantly looking for the end run around the thing itself?
And what does that implicitly teach or model for a student if that is their goal? So they can go through the process of an education, get the validation of the grades and the degree, but never develop what you call a practice that actually gives them the kind of mental and dispositional tools to conduct themselves in the world.
Just manage life,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's and you and I have talked off air. This is not new.
Right.
This is not new at all. I have an anecdote in Why They Can't Write about a student at Clemson University. This would have been around 2005, 2006. We're talking about a novel called Everything Matters by Ron Curry Jr., where the main character is born knowing when the end of the world is coming. Junior Thibodeau Jr. He knows the world is going to end on this day, on his birthday when he's like 38 years old. The implications of this, how would you live your life knowing not only are you going to die, but the entire world is going to be wiped out? It's this sort of existential question. And we're talking about it, and I asked some sort of preparatory questions and about like what they think about the novel. And I had a young woman raise her hand and said, Warner. They never said professor. This lets you know what they thought of me. Warner. I learned that I can't wait until I retire. And I was like, yes, carpe diem. That's right. Don't wait until you retire. Seize the day. And I'm ranting about that for a couple of minutes, and I see some of the students start to shake their heads. And I'm like, what? Another student raises his hand. He's like, I don't think she meant it that way. I'm like, what do you mean? I think she meant it like, oh, I can't wait until I retire. Like, I'm looking forward to retiring so I can live life, right? Between now and then, and this is somebody who's maybe 20, 21 years old at most, who's thinking, and then I started, well, when's retirement? 65, 68, 70. I'm like, so you're telling me for the next 45 years, you're just going to sort of be doing stuff in preparation for when you can start living. And when I put it that way, the cognitive dissonance starts to sort of swirl. But what it revealed to me is the students, and again, this was 20 years ago, were so immersed in a system of what I call indefinite future reward that they'd lost sight that there could be rewards in the short term or even the medium term. It's like everything is for something else. This assignment is to get a grade in the class. This grade in the class is to get a degree. This degree is to get the job. The job is to get the thing. And we had a great conversation the rest of the semester about what are we here for, right? It happened to be a a course about apocalyptic literature, post-apocalyptic literature. So we had a lot of opportunities to talk about the end of the world and what we would do about these things if the world was ending. But it was that example stuck with me forever because it was so common and so ordinary and unremarkable from the student's experience, not objectionable, simply the state of the world that we had constructed and accepted. And I found it unacceptable. I found it more unacceptable than my students did at that time. That bothered me. Still does.
You write in a recent piece on Substack, getting students to see their own learning is both a tool for engagement and a way to disrupt the transactional nature of school. This requires student ownership of their work, their minds, their feelings, the things that make us all human. Expand on that a little bit in the context of, the AI moment or the AI conversation that's swirling all around us.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm glad I wrote that. So I think there's a couple questions we walk around with that are more pressing when you're younger and perhaps even more pressing when you're younger and in college. Those questions are, who am I and how do I do this? Where this is everything, right? Yep. This class, this life, this relationship, this. And because you're young and you don't have a ton of experience, those questions are tougher. And so what I want students to experience in the limited context of like a writing course is the sensation of being able to answer those questions about writing, right? So as the semester goes along, I would ask students at the end of every experience, I would say, okay, you need to write a short reflection on what do you know now that you didn't know before? And that could be anything. It could be purely factual, like they're writing about some topic. If they want to just go on and on and on about all the stuff they learned, great. What can you do now that you couldn't do before? Those are the two questions. And they're articulating to themselves the acquisition of some aspect of their practice, or not. If the answer is not much, then we can have a conversation. Okay, well, this was designed for these things to happen. They didn't for you. What went on? The point is to give the students and I fodder to have an ongoing semester-long conversation about the development of their practice. And then their grade at the end becomes really a joint assessment of how far that journey went. They started here, they ended here. What do you know now you didn't know before? What can you do now that you couldn't do before? How far apart are those? That distance is what we're going to grade. Because each student is a unique intelligence that starts at a different spot. And I can say that once I started doing that, students became more responsible for their own learning. The rigor of my course increased. They were more likely to give the good old college try on a piece of writing. And what we were trying to do became instantly more, the word I always used, I like to use, is legible to them, apparent to them, in ways that often the simulations of school were not.
Well, the idea of the practice is to make it legible to them. And I think a lot of students that I speak with and have taught over the years often see the point of a writing assignment to get it done and turn it in, and that's totally reasonable conclusion for them to draw from what they're usually asked to do. But they don't see it as a way to look at their own thinking. And that makes it harder for them to know that they're thinking, and then to be delighted by their thinking, and to enjoy it, and then to elaborate it. And we spoke the other day before you got to campus. You had just been at the Mark Twain House up in Connecticut, and you were struck by a program they had for young playwrights.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me that you were inspired in a way by the fact that how much they enjoyed watching their own minds work as opposed to using the machines. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a program at the Mark Twain House for, I might get the ages wrong, but it's like 10 to 14-year-olds, like young.
Yeah.
Summer program where they are fellows and they come to the Mark Twain House and they have some instruction and mentors and this kind of stuff, but then they write plays. And as I hear from the people who run the program, the students are scornful of the idea that you would use like a large language model to help on the play, because I think this is particularly true of playwriting. What you're doing when you're writing a play is quite literally bringing people to life. And you cannot bring people to life with something that is quite literally lifeless. And they either through intuition or whatever, these young playwrights recognize that. And what's inspiring is they are apparently unconcerned with the outcome of this experience. Like, they're going to write a play, but they're not thinking about, is it going to be produced? Is it going to, they're just reveling in the experience of creating, imagining people, giving them words, having them intersect and interact with each other, and having some experience for an audience come out of that. I mean, it is, if you think about like plays, theater, like, it is kind of crazy that it works on us.
Yes.
As well as it does. That we know that's fake. We know somebody wrote it. We know it's just two actors performing it, and yet we can be moved to tears or laughter or all of these things. And one of the I'm going to more paraphrase than quote myself, but one of the things I say in More Than Words is that I'm often confounded by the idea that people think what a large language model can do is so amazing, when we have much greater marvels all around us in the incredible individual diversity of humans. The problem is, in school contexts, is we do not value that human variability. In fact, students are much better off tamping that down for the purposes of assessment and grading. And so a lot of my message is really, there's not that much we have to change necessarily, but we do have to value the things that are genuinely important.
Yeah. Is there ways in which you can imagine AI technologies, ChatGPT, the interactions actually being used in a way that helps students develop a practice, helps them make their own thinking visible?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's rooted in the words that I know are at the center of how Iona is approaching this. Agency is number one for me. Mm-hmm. If you're using it with intention, often in a posture of experimentation, like a what if. What if I do this? And if you have the capacity to judge the outcomes of that against something meaningful, absolutely. The technology does not have a ton of fascination to me in the intimate, meaningful parts of writing. To me, that's like, I read, I think, I write. It has utility for me around research and this kind of stuff. But I'm very open to the idea that others who work differently, right? Our processes are all variable, can find ways of cracking open some new insight into themselves using this technology. But it has to be agentic. It can't be, I'm just going to speed my way to this. Speed and efficiency are not certainly not educational values. There's no value we would attach to like a good piece of writing. Oh, that was fast, right? That's not something we would care about. And so it will take a lot of experimentation, I think. And even my assumption also is that the most interesting and productive uses of it in that realm will be largely idiosyncratic. That somebody will publish like how to use this to make your great screenplay or play or novel or whatever, and you will look at the thing the person who wrote that book did and be like, oh, that's pretty good, right? But when it's translated to something that's a formula in a book, that it won't work. In the same way those how to write books never worked to begin with.
Well, I think one of the interesting things that we are going to watch unfold is the way that this technology, which is or can be eminently idiosyncratic. You can use it, create your own interactions, take it any direction you want it to go. But most of the productization pressures coming from the companies making them actually don't want to lean into that. Mm-hmm. They want it to be oracular, that it is providing the right answer. You don't need to think. And so part of what I think is worrisome about the technology is not inherent in the technology as in the way it is productized.
Yeah, the technology can be used any way we wish, right? But unfortunately, we're in this market where so much money has flooded into the space, where the financial bet these companies are making is impossibly large. Yes. And for that bet to pay off, it must be productized, right? And most of what they've done thus far has failed. The most popular product of a large language model is homework machine. Yeah. Other things they've tried don't seem to work as well. And that tension, right? These companies need us to use it en masse to replace some human labor versus the truly creative, pardon the pun, generative work humans could do with it are at significant tension and will continue to cause problems. I mean, one of the reasons why I sometimes anybody who reads more than words would put me towards the AI resistor camp or skeptic. But I've never been an outright resistor, and even sort of dispositionally I'm that way. And on the moral and ethical questions of the stuff, in the same way that I think like vegetarianism is the correct moral stance, but I'm not a vegetarian, right? I have these views. But I've never become an outright resistor or refuser because I am interested in the potential of human beings to make use of these things. Mm-hmm. Not for me, probably. I'm just not interested in exploring them the way it must be. But we know it has had this potential in other arenas than writing. We know that it's a very powerful technology. It's sort of amazing when you think about how it works. Yeah. It's more amazing. It's actually more amazing that it works as a syntax generation machine than that it's a brain, that it's a thinking machine. So I'm happy to have those people explore, but we also have to keep in mind what the aim of these companies are, what is downstream of inviting these products into our schools, into our homes. They don't have our well-being at heart. Yeah. That remains in our hands to control that.
I think from an educational institution point of view, to me, what is most challenging and also the biggest opportunity with AI is the fact that it forces us to come to grips with what we really mean by learning, what our values are in that regard, which have often been kind of masked by the transactional nature of grading and degrees and all of that. I'm going to, as we wrap up, I'm going to read you a quote because it speaks to what we've been thinking about a lot at Iona. You mentioned agency, and there's expression and responsibility, which we think are framing dispositions for anybody's use of AI, and powerfully so, and can help us to get the most reward from the technology. But this is a quote, it's not from you, but it could have been written by you, I think, by a fellow named Zachary Gartenberg, who's at St. John's Annapolis. And it starts with a question. It's two questions, actually. Is learning merely a refinement of performance, or can it also be understood as a mode of orientation, a posture toward the not yet known, a practice shaped by inward responsibility, difficulty, and directedness towards something beyond utility or output? It seems to me in those questions are a lot of what you say about what writing is, what it can be, when it's not just the production of words for their own sake. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, that's far more eloquent than I ever am.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
But I agree with the sentiment. I mean, one of the things I would tell my students, right, first-year writing students, college freshmen, who are skeptical about writing, I would say to them, I fundamentally use writing as a way to make sense of the world and myself. And anybody can do this. This opportunity is open to any person on the planet. You don't need to be a writer or writing teacher. It's simply the determination to live an examined life and make some sense of it, or sometimes not make sense of it and accept that it's senseless. And I find great comfort in it. The world is often very challenging. I have a hard time watching the news these days, but I know I have this practice of writing to fall back on to help me process it. And I'm fortunate to have some outlets where I get to share that with people. Mm. But even if I didn't, I would write. I don't think I could stop myself.
Great. John Warner, thank you very much. We look forward to your keynote address tomorrow, and which will be recorded and also available to the audience for this podcast at some point. Thank you for coming to New Rochelle.
Thanks for having me.